Hey folks, welcome back. I had the pleasure of sitting in on Jimmy G's presentation at the Crappie Fest this weekend. In case you missed it, here's the presentation in full. Enjoy.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Good. This afternoon, whatever time it is. Woo! All right, trying to get this microphone position right here. So my name's Jim Garvalia. I am the IDNR Fisheries Biologist for Lake Shelbyville and pretty much the surrounding area. Are you hearing me all right in the back? I don't know how to turn it up. Crank it to 11. Test. I'll do my best to kind of shout into this thing. So again, my name's Jim. I'm the IDNR Fisheries Biologist. I'm going to give just kind of a brief status of the fishery update. I'm going to throw a lot of graphs and stuff at you. I'll try to walk through it and just pretty much show what's going on with the different fisheries in the lake, what we're seeing, and more or less what to expect for 2025 for fishing. So everybody here probably knows quite a bit about Lake Shelbyville, right? It's the third largest lake in the state at a little over 11,100 acres. Average depth's around 19 foot, and quite a bit of shoreline, especially if you compare it to the other two Army Corps reservoirs. Right, we got a lot of coves and stuff. So a lot of shoreline, which needs a lot of habitat, which, right, is what the Lake Shelbyville Fish Habitat Alliance, one of the many things they're doing is helping to put in habitat throughout the lake. So the lake has over a dozen what we would consider sport fish. That definition, can kind of change depending on what you want to consider a sport fish. But at least 12 are considered sport fish and over 30 species of fish overall. Some of the things we're dealing with, right? So this, first and foremost, this is a flood control reservoir. So water levels are going to be fluctuating. That brings in sediment, nutrients, so that can be something we deal with. And this is true for a lot of local, area reservoirs in central Illinois. The lake's over 50 years old at this point, right? So that's getting up there for a reservoir. When you see that, you're going to have this sedimentation issue, shallowing up, and you lose a lot of the habitat, right? So when the lake was first built, there were a lot of trees. Some of them are still standing, but a lot of that brush and trees and all of that kind of biological material that was habitat early on has since degraded, and it's kind of a scientific term, but what happens in a reservoir, it becomes a pelagic dominated ecosystem. So basically what that means is pelagic is offshore ecosystem. So kind of the whole what we see is fish that live offshore, right, at least for part of the year. So this is going to be our crappie, our things that you don't necessarily see near shore all the time. They tend to do a little bit better. One of the big things too with the lake level fluctuations is we don't have a lot of, if any, aquatic vegetation, right? True aquatic vegetation. We have terrestrial vegetation that gets flooded, but we don't have aquatic vegetation. And so those aspects that are missing from the near shore habitat help drive a kind of this what we call a pelagic dominated ecosystem. So we'll get into that more. There's a lot of work going on in the lake. A lot of this goes on, you don't necessarily see it, but there's a lot of things going on between the different habitats going in. We've done over the last couple of years these floating islands with some vegetation, seeing if we could get vegetation established, just trying a new method. We're rearing fish on site, so I'm going to be talking a lot about fish stocking. A lot of those fish are coming straight from our hatchery, but we actually do have, the Army Corps has technically two rearing ponds, one main one, where we rear fish on site as well, and I'll get into that more when the time comes. And a lot of this work would not be possible without the volunteers. The Habitat Alliance, our guides are great and work with us, letting us know what they're seeing and what's going on around the lake. Whenever we need help with anything, it's been fantastic. So thank you to everybody who's here helping support the Habitat Alliance. Thank you for that, because we wouldn't be able to do this stuff. So I'm going to define a couple terms that are going to be used a lot. These are just kind of our fisheries terms that we use when we're looking at populations. And I want to make sure you understand this. Otherwise, this other stuff may not make as much sense. So I'm going to be talking about catch per unit effort. All that means is it's a measure of relative abundance. So it's how many fish did we get in a net, in an hour of electrofishing. It's just a relative, it's our measure of relative number of fish. Relative weight is body condition, right? So my relative weight would be a little bit high. So 100 is kind of like optimal. I might be like a 105, 110. If you were undernourished, you'd be under 100. So hundreds, basically anywhere from 95 to 105 is considered normal. Below that, basically it may be that there's too many fish. It may be that there's not enough food, right? There's something going on where those fish don't have a good body condition. And then you're going to see this a lot where I say less than stock size. So this is based off of fish length, or stock size and up. Where this metric is depends on the species of fish, but the main point all you need to know is less than stock size are basically your little fish. These are probably going to be young of year fish that were produced that year, versus stock size and up, basically adults. So this will make a lot more sense as we kind of talk about the different species, but I wanted to at least give this as a brief primer. So we're at Crappie Fest, right? So we should probably talk about crappie first. So in Lake Shelbyville, white crappie are the dominant species out of the two. Generally speaking, we have more white crappie than black crappie. This graph here on the left is showing the catch per unit effort. So again, this is relative number of fish. In this case, this is with electrofishing data. So we prefer to use netting data, but we don't have the time and staffing to net it every year, but we are able to electrofish every year. So we use both datas to kind of answer different questions. So what's nice with the electrofishing data is we have samples from every year. And so you can see here from 1990 through 2022, numbers were, steadily increasing. We have dropped a little bit in the last 2 years. So I know this is very hard probably for folks to see in the back, and I apologize. So basically we're looking at 2020, 2021, 2022, and then this right here is 2023, 2024, and this is just adult crappie. So basically from like 6 inches up, 5 inches up. This graph here is showing in 2024, this is the length distribution, we call it. So basically what you're seeing here is we start seeing fish around 6 inches. We've got a peak through to about 11 or 12, and then we get a few 12 to 13 inches, which, folks fishing, that's probably what you're seeing out there, right? No surprise. And that's a pretty typical length distribution for crappie. So what's going on here, right? Numbers are a little bit lower. I don't want this to look concerning. These numbers here are very high. So I don't want this to look very doom and gloom, Nick. Oh, he's not at his table. These numbers here are still a little bit higher than what we typically see for Lake Decatur, to give you an example. So numbers are lower. I'm not saying that they're low. And I believe what's really happening here is lake level, water level, right? So this is looking same time frame from 2019 through 2024. The yellow line is basically summer pool. And if you notice, if I was to basically draw a line right here, which is we're 2021, 2022, you can see these flood years we had where we had these big pulses going up to 605, 610, right? So summer pool is about 599, right? 600. We were getting anywhere from 5 to 10 feet over summer pool, versus the last 3 years, we have not gotten nearly as high. We haven't had that flashiness. And that has nothing to do with what the Army Corps is doing. That's just simply we've had drought years, right? A lot of lakes have been low. Lake Shelbyville has actually done a pretty good job of actually maintaining summer pool. Several lakes in the area have dropped multiple feet by fall, just because they're water supply lakes. But so more or less what I believe is going on, those flood years, we have booms in recruitment, right? So higher than what I would call average. We had several of those years in a row, so we had extremely high recruitment. Now we're having more steady water levels, so we're back to having steady recruitment. Does not mean the fishery's crashing. There's just less of them. And again, we look here, we're still seeing all of those year classes. We just aren't seeing these relatively high numbers. And folks that have been fishing for the last 5-6 years, there's a lot of crappie, right? There have been a lot of crappie in the lake. Thankfully, we've had the food to for them to eat. Otherwise, their growth could have been stunted, which it was not, thankfully. But with this decrease in number, we may actually see a slight increase in growth rate. Interestingly, though, so relative weight of the crappie has dipped a little bit. It's still not bad. A lot of lakes, crappie will be mid to upper 80s in the Midwest, and so we're still not doing bad. But it's interesting that the numbers went down and their relative weight also went down. My guess there is, again, the lake isn't having as much influx of nutrients because of that we aren't having those big rain events, so there's not quite as much plankton and macroinvertebrates that they're eating. So I think that's what's going on there. Again, it looks extreme in this graph, but dropping a couple points like that's not a huge deal. Switching over to black crappie, so we're more or less seeing the same thing going on, a little bit less for catch per unit effort for abundance last couple of years. There is a little bit of an uptick here in 2024, and I think part of that is in 2023, won't get into the story, but we actually raised black crappie in our rearing pond for 1 year. We had a pond ready to go, and we didn't have the fish that were supposed to go in. The hatchery had some issues, and so we ran out, make lemonade out of lemons, and we grabbed some black crappie, threw them in to see if we could get them to spawn. And we actually got about 75,000 black crappie out of there to stock. So helped elevate that number a little bit. So I'm hoping that'll help. That's probably this little bit of a dip here we're seeing, or peak here is those fish from that kind of 6 to 7 inch mark. So again, I think the same thing's happening, right? A little bit less recruitment. Black crappie, they do better in lakes that have vegetation. So if you go up north, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, you go down south where they've got lakes with vegetation, black crappie do better down there. And there's a lot of reasons for that I won't get into, but that's pretty typical for these larger reservoirs. Central Illinois, we're going to have less black crappie than we do white crappie. Again, mean relative weights decreased a little bit, which I think has to do with the lake not flooding and nutrient levels not being quite as high as they have been. Switching to largemouth bass. So I get a lot of complaints about bass in the lake. I shouldn't say a lot. Comes up often. Largemouth bass are a species that really need aquatic vegetation. If you look at any lake across the country, good bass lakes have aquatic vegetation. That's just, they go hand in hand. They like shoreline. That's the habitat they need, whether it's for spawning, whether it's somewhere to hide, and then for predation, to be able to feed on things. It's hard to have a ton of bass in a lake that has no vegetation. So we're kind of starting right there. So this graph on the left is young of year catch per unit effort. So these are basically the fish that were produced the spring of the year that's on there. What are we seeing in the fall? And so we peaked. We had a pretty good year class here in 2020. We had a low year class in 2022. Otherwise, we're pretty steady at that 20 to 30 fish per hour mark. So, we're again, we kind of dumped down there. We're coming back up. And if you look, if you offset this by a year, you can basically see, right? We had good recruitment there. So we're seeing those fish moving into the population here. So I don't think survival's an issue. By the time they reach this size, it's just lack of vegetation. Bass don't have good recruitment. They're not producing a ton of young. We have bass. We're just not gonna, we're not gonna be the next, I don't know, insert the name of some reservoir down south, So as far as the size of the bass, we're not looking too bad. So here again, you see we had a pretty good year class in 2024. That's what this peak is here. And we've got bass out to 15 inches, pretty steady. And then they kind of drop off around that 17, 18 inch mark. These larger bass, we see them more in tournament catches than we do in our surveys for whatever reason. So, there are bass out there. In fact, we did see a few in it's either the musky netting or the crappie netting. We had some 21, 22 inch largemouth that aren't in this graph. So they're out there. The good news is they're growing well. So, this 100 line for relative weights where they're supposed to be if they're healthy. So the bass we do have plenty of food. They're growing really well. Our catch per unit effort for this past survey was 62, 63. That's pretty good for Lake Shelbyville. I think we're doing about as well as we could hope. One of the things that gets brought up often with largemouth bass is, well, why don't you stock bass? Anybody who doesn't want to believe me, I will provide you with the report. It's about this thick. They'd studied this for 10 years on lakes, including Lake Shelbyville, Lake Decatur. Bass stocking in this area does not work. You stock them in, and you may see them for about a year, and then they disappear. They basically, at best, if you're lucky, they will replace the fish you already had. They don't ever increase the number you have. Now, there's obviously, right, situation. If you have no bass, you would need to stock, right? If you have a new pond, something like that. But for these larger reservoirs, you aren't able to increase the number of bass that way. There's basically a carrying capacity, and if you stock those fish, they just replace the fish you already had, which is unfortunate. I wish we could solve this and increase numbers with stocking, because that would make things really easy. But it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So bass fishing overall, again, I'll go back, right? We've had 2 good year classes. And so I expect this number to increase again, and we'll be looking pretty good. Basically, long-term trend, we'll be looking at where we've been. Also, just as an aside, the IHSA state finals are going to be at Lake Shelbyville. They've moved from Carlisle. That's where they've been held for a number of years now. That's going to be on June 6th and 7th, I believe out of 9th Street Ramp. They are going to be looking for volunteers. I believe they have volunteers help with backing boats down. They may be, I don't know how it all works. This is my first year going through this, but they may be looking, I know at minimum looking for folks to back boats down. They may be looking for boats for anglers to go out on. I'm assuming most will have them. But these are basically the high school kids, right? So high school sports. This is the state finals. So kind of excited to have this here. If you want to come out and volunteer, if you want to just come out and check it out, I think it'll be a pretty good time. So they'll be here for the next few years doing that. If you're interested in volunteering, reach out to me, reach out to the Army Corps, and we'll get you in touch with the folks that are working on that. So smallmouth bass. Folks are probably aware we've got some smallmouth bass in the Kaskaskia below the dam. And over the years, we've taken some of those fish as brood stock, raised some fish, and then tried stocking them into the lake. The most recent efforts in 2020 and 2021. 2020 was a pretty good year. We stocked over 25,000 smallmouth. They aren't taking. For those in the back that can't maybe see, this graph right here, or this line, this is one fish. And this one right here is one fish. So in 2021 and 2022, we caught one basically 9-inch bass each year. And that's all we've seen. I've heard of a few being caught in tournaments, but it just hasn't been working. We've also been having issues getting brood stock. The ones that we had at the hatchery, it basically aged out. They died of old age. And we've had a hard time finding enough of the brood stock from below the dam to do this again. So I'm not going to say we're not doing this anymore, but we haven't been able to for the last few years, and we've been doing some other things with the rearing pond. So that's kind of where smallmouth have been. Another fish that we've recently been trying to kind of develop a population is striped bass. So to be clear, this isn't like in other lakes in the area, you'll see hybrid striped bass. These are pure striped bass, like what you'd see out east, rockfish, right? These things can get 20, 30, 40 pounds. Stocking started in 2018. The Army Corps has actually been purchasing these from a Fish and Wildlife hatchery to stock. This here is basically showing how to ID them. The striped bass have 2 separate tooth patches when you're looking at the tongue. White bass will have, they're basically lobed, so it'll be connected in white bass and yellow bass. Unfortunately, similar story to the smallmouth. They just don't seem to be taking. There's also been some issues just getting the total of fish that we're requesting from the hatchery. Striped bass are really hard to raise at hatcheries in captivity, and so they've had a hard time getting us the number of fish we want to stock, and then we're just not seeing great success. In 2023, we saw a few of the fish that had basically come off the truck 3 months ago, before this. And then this past fall, we had one that was about 8 inches, which probably would have been from the 2023 stocking. And then this was actually caught doing some night electrofishing for a research project with the Kaskaskia Biological Station. And we caught this down towards the dam. This is the biggest one I've caught in a survey in the lake. I've seen a picture of probably a year or two older one that was caught below the dam, and that's about all I'm seeing. There's a few out there. It's just not working, and for the cost of stocking, more than likely this effort's going to be wrapping up. And we gave it a shot, but it unfortunately doesn't seem to be working. The good news is the white bass we have made a rebound. If you've been at these talks before, I've discussed this. So starting in 2019, before that we had a kill in like the mid 2010s pre my time. And white bass numbers were pretty low there for a couple of years. In 2019, here we're looking at basically the young a year fish. You can see in 2019 we had a great spawn, huge kind of. Something happened. I'm guessing water level related. We're pretty sure a lot of this spawning happens in the river, and so had a great year there, and that's kind of been driving this increase. And this is in the number of adult white bass. Intermediate years 2020 to 2023 recruitment was okay, and then it looks like last year we may have had a pretty good boost in recruitment there. And so we can see that here. These are those young a year fish. We can see these are probably a lot of those 2019 spawn fish that are getting 14, 15 inches. That's pretty big for a white bass. So white bass fishing should be picking up in the next year or two with that, and hopefully we have a couple more good year classes like that to keep that fishery going, because I think that's a lot of fun. Musky. So this one I kind of have to tell you a little bit of a story. So Lake Shelbyville, for those that aren't aware, used to be like a musky fishing destination in the state. There used to be the governor's tournament, the director's tournament was out here. It was like kind of like the director's hunt. They had a director's musky tournament. It was an extremely good fishery, and we believe what happened is there was a disease outbreak. We had a musky die off in the lake, and it was only musky. So when you see that, you typically assume it's some kind of a disease, because if it was something environmental, it would affect more than just the one species. So unfortunately, that happened sometime in the mid 2000s, and then subsequently from that, the stockings seemed like they weren't successful in trying to bring them back. Fish were going in, we weren't seeing them by the next year, and so. Musky task force actually got put together between the DNR, the Army Corps, the Lake Shelbyville Musky Club, and others, and basically they tried tackling this issue. And so one of the things they wanted to test was these fish are typically stocked in like September. They wanted to try holding some fish later to see if maybe survival would improve. So to do this in 2018 and 2019, I don't know, Mounts, are you still here? So the previous biologist, he was here walking around. He had some kickback from our higher ups, but he really wanted to try holding these fish. So they said, all right, you can hold these fish in a rearing pond, the rearing pond here on site. And so about a third of those fish were held in this rearing pond for another couple of months. The first year they were stocked in December. Second year they were stocked late November. And all of these fish that were held later had one of their fins clipped, so their right pelvic fin. So it'd kind of be, well, I'll show you a picture here in a second. So we were able to identify these fish to see, hey, maybe, do they have better survival or not? The rest of the fish were stocked at the normal time, weren't given a clip, and released like normal. Fast forward, that's what a clip a fin clip typically will look like. Sometimes there's a little bit of regrowth. We actually caught this fish 2 different years. And so as you can see, it has that fin clip on the right side, which means it was a fish from that rearing pond that was held late. During the first 2 surveys in 2019 and we didn't survey in 2020 because of COVID. So 2021, these were basically the only fish we were seeing, were fish with the right clip. And so we knew, okay, stocking later seems to be a possible option, so we're gonna try doing that with the whole stocking. So fast forward, this is the 2021 survey data. These surveys are done with trap nets, and they're done in the spring. So The 2021 fish have not been stocked yet, right? So this is basically what we're seeing here. We're seeing a couple of these fish that were from the pond held late. The full stocking in 2021 was done later. They also fed them pretty heavily, so they got very large. And what happened was they got so big, we actually caught them the first year, which we normally don't catch 1-year-old muskie in these nets until they're 2. But they grew so much being held at the hatchery, we were actually getting them in our nets. And so this was this is the 2022 survey. This peak right here is the 2021 muskie. So those fish were bigger. That probably helped with their survival a little bit. Fast forward to 2023. Again, these are those 2021 fish. Notice you don't see the 2022 fish. That is because they were a little bit more normal size. We don't normally get those fish. So, of course, now we're kind of nervous, right? Well, now we got to wait another year. Are we going to see them? We did. So this right here, again, is the 2021 fish. These fish that you're seeing right here are the 2022 fish. Now, you notice there's this big drop. The problem with this graph is this is raw number of fish. And this survey got cut short because the wind kicked up. It was like blowing 30. So we actually fished less time. And so that's why there's less fish. But if you look at this as fish per net, we had 3.3 fish this year and we had 5.4 fish. So we're actually getting more fish per net set in 2024. It just looks weird because there were less fish overall because we didn't fish the nets for as many days. So CPUE is still increasing. Obviously, this year class is very big in that 2021 year class. There were also some extra fish stocked that year. So there were a lot of combinations between we stocked them late, so they're surviving. They were a little bit bigger, and so I think survival was better. This is also the year class that's driving a lot of the fishing below the dam, unfortunately. So dam escapement's an issue with muskie. It happens, pretty much anywhere where there's a dam that they can go over. We're aware of it. I've had a lot of people reach out. We're aware of it. As of right now, it's mainly being driven by this 1 year class. They've always been down there. I mean, the state record came from down there, 20, 25 years ago. Don't quote me on that timing, but it's pre my time. And so that's basically what's going on. We are still seeing these fish. This year class will fully show up, hopefully, here in a couple of weeks when we do our netting survey. And this year class will probably look about like this. Next year, we'll see these fish move over. So growth rates are looking pretty good. For those that can't see the numbers, these are basically 3-year-old muskie that are getting anywhere from 30 to 35 inches. So that's pretty good growth rate. So I'm happy with what's going on there. So those stockings will continue as they have been. The number will probably temper down a little bit from what we saw in 2021. But hopefully the muskie fishing is going to pick up on the lake as well, not just below the dam. So folks should get out there and do some muskie fishing. Walleye, where's Les? All right, walleye. So this graph's going to be really complicated, and I apologize, but I kind of nerded out over this data a little bit. So that is a Lake Shelbyville walleye. There are large walleye in this lake, I promise you. Don't ask me how to catch them. I've got to use electricity or nets. Maybe talk to Les because I don't know. I have a hard time actually catching them, but I know they're there. So what we're seeing in this graph here, these bars are the number of fish that were stocked. This includes, which I'll get into in a minute, fish that came straight from the hatchery and fish that came from the on-site rearing pond, which we get those fish from the hatchery and raise them up. The line here, black line, is showing what we caught that following fall of those stocked fish. And so more or less what you see here is, the more fish we stock, the more we see. Something happened here in 2021. And it happened here a little bit in 2022 and 2023. They moved the stocking location, and so we weren't picking up as many because they weren't stocked as close to where we were normally sampling. And so that's why these are these likely should be up a little bit. We just weren't shocking in the area of the lake where they were stocked. So that kind of misrepresents it a little bit. But overall, what we're stocking is surviving. The other issue with these here, the low catch rates, is the lake level. So one of the sites where we do these is the islands up the Okaw Arm. And these years where catch rates were pretty good, we were shocking the trees on those islands because the lake was flooded. And in these years, we couldn't even see these are night surveys, we couldn't even see the island because we were so far offshore because the lake was down. So that definitely impacted the catch rates. I adjusted some of those sites and added some extra sampling in 2024. And so again, we were able to see that those fish are there. One of the things I want to point out is, so we have an on-site rearing pond, and the general schedule is we raise walleye one year and sauger the next. So it's every other year. We're also getting both species every year from the hatchery. So both walleye and sauger are being stocked every year, but there's basically, let's say, a bumper crop every other year that we're also raising on-site at the rearing pond. So you'll see, right, this big stocking is rearing pond and hatchery. Just hatchery, rearing pond and hatchery. We had an issue here I won't even get into with the hatchery. It's why we got black crappie instead. But you'll notice here in 2024, we got quite a few fish. Those are all hatchery fish. The hatchery basically had extra fish that we were able to get. 2025 is going to be a walleye stocking year. So there's going to be another year or another stocking year that's going to look probably like one of these two here. So we're going to get a lot more fish. So we're basically going to have two large year classes of walleye moving in. So when you look at this graph here, realize stockings were a little bit lower here. And one of those was that the hatchery had some issues. We were lucky that we got any fish at all, honestly, in 2023. So these catch rates are going to go up 2024. And then as long as our rearing pond does well, which we've had pretty good success, we should have a really good year class for 2025 and see those numbers. And that should increase fish and catch over the next few years. Sauger, again, same story, right? So when we're not rearing walleye, we're rearing sauger in the rearing pond. So 2022 was a rearing pond year. 2024 was a rearing pond year. We had a lot of fish. Again, you'll notice 2023, there's no fish stocked from the rearing pond or the hatchery. So why is that? Jimmy, what did you do? Why are you destroying the lake? So what happened is, the previous biologist had this great idea. He says, hey, we've got all these waterfall areas on the lake. They're kind of like a rearing pond. They get drained roughly the same time. Why don't we try throwing some fish in there? So that's what we did. So we did not have the hatchery stock any. That way, the only sauger for that year class would have been from there. So then we could say, all right, do we see any of those fish? Yes or no? Is this a viable option? Maybe we can stock both species every year on site. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So real technical, but basically that water sits too long, the zooplankton communities get too big, and we don't think those fish had very high survival. So we attempted it. I don't think it worked. We may look into it again and try some different things, but that's what's going on there. So 2024, we had a great stocking year. And you'll remember we also had a great stocking year for 2024. So both species should be doing good over the next couple of years. These sauger were also stocked literally during the eclipse, which I would like to think gives them higher survival. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but this is us during the eclipse last spring. We were literally acclimating. These are the bags of fry. There's 650,000 fry in these bags from the hatchery. We're letting the water acclimate, but they were stocked during that, and you can see the big old year class here. So this year class will be like the eclipse sauger. Maybe they'll grow big. I don't know, fight better, something like that. So point there, walleye sauger, both had good stockings this past year, and numbers should be on the rise here over the next couple of years. Channel catfish. So the lake generally does not get stocked with channel catfish. Every once in a while, we'll have some extras thrown in from the hatchery. But overall, it's all natural recruitment, and recruitment's been relatively low. So something that channel catfish need for spawning is a cavity. They're cavity nesters, whether it's an undercut bank, hollowed out log, something like that. And as reservoirs age, that disappears. And so these folks from Pennsylvania had this great idea to build these wooden boxes. If you're a duck hunter, you could almost think of them like a wood duck, box, but for catfish, right? And so the idea is you put these out, right, build it, and they will spawn, basically. I have this net here. So this is electrofishing data. It's not the best way to sample for catfish. I am planning on doing some actual catfish netting at some point. to do this. We also have a whole research project going on some other lakes, looking at this as well with Eastern Illinois University. But point being, catfish numbers have been low. So back, it would have been basically this time last year, we were able to place 80 of these boxes out in the lake. DNR and the Habitat Alliance paid for the lumber, and then the local area high school shops actually built them. So that was super cool. That was kind of done through the Army Corps' Youth Ambassador Program, working with the schools. Was really fun to be able to do that. The kids were also able to come out and deploy the boxes with us and, put them out and anchor them, which was super cool. And so we put these boxes out, and then it's like, all right, well, are they working or not? And I'm not patient. So normally these nets, you got to wait till the fish are about 2 years old before you start seeing them in the nets. I don't have the time and patience for that. So I decided to go see if the box were working firsthand. We tried electrofishing, and I don't think the electricity was getting to them, or they were just floating in the box. And so I had never been noodling before, but I had seen enough to make it up as I went. And sure enough, we checked. I promise the electricity's not running right here. I would not have that smile on my face. We checked 10 of the boxes one day. They were a lot harder to find than you'd think, right? So we actually had one of the Army Corps biologists out with his live scope pointing to where the box was so I could find the box, get onto it. And we were able to check 10 boxes. One of them must have had some kind of construction flaw. The rock had come out, and it was actually like semi-buoyant, so there was nothing in that one. Out of the other 9 boxes, 3 had male catfish guarding eggs, and 2 had females that hadn't released eggs yet. So basically, we're looking at about 50% of the boxes had catfish out of the ones we checked. So can't say that this is going to lead to an increase in catfish population yet, but signs are good. They're using the boxes. They found them within 4 months of us putting them out there. And these boxes, the catfish spawn is also long enough that the boxes can actually be used by more than one breeding pair. So you could theoretically have more than one couple or set of fish spawn in a box. And so on Monday, we're actually going to be going out and setting another 15 to 20 boxes that were built by the Lake Shelbyville Fish Habitat Alliance. So we'll be monitoring that. Unfortunately, some of the boxes did not fare well against the ice that we had this year. Some of them got crushed, so we're dealing with that and coming up with possibly some different designs, placement strategies, that sort of thing. Learning as we go. But the other thing I'll mention, we were doing some night electrofishing this fall, and we weren't targeting catfish. We were only netting certain species, but we did end up with 2 young of year catfish, which I rarely see in our lakes, and they were caught near where some of these boxes were. So again, anecdotal, it's only 2 fish, but hopefully these boxes will help increase channel catfish numbers. Flathead, we've been seeing a little bit of recruitment from year to year. Numbers aren't huge. I know some folks would like to see some more flatheads out there, and so we are going to experiment with building. In this situation, we kind of have to actually design it. Basically basing it off of noodling boxes, but we're going to be putting some of these out for some larger wooden boxes for catfish to spawn. The location, I should mention, the location of the catfish, the channel catfish boxes, and the flathead boxes aren't on the maps. Point for that is they're not meant to be fished, they're meant for the fish to spawn, right? So we're not necessarily releasing those locations. We want those fish to spawn, that way we have them to catch. So plans are there for that, but we do have some 30, 40 pound flatheads out there. Electrofishing, again, is not the greatest way, not the style we're doing to get them, but there are some out there. I think this is the last one, bluegill. Sometimes folks will ask me about bluegill. Large reservoirs with gizzard shad aren't a good recipe for large bluegill, but we do have bluegill out there. You can see we're basically at, 3 to 6 inches is kind of the range. I have seen some 8-inch bluegill. If you fish any like the standing timber in the summer, it seems like some of the bigger bluegill hold on that timber. I have seen those, but overall they're going to be smaller. They compete with gizzard shad, and we have a lot of gizzard shad. So their growth rates are usually a little bit slow, but they are out there. I've been droning on forever. There's another 15, 20 species I'm not even going to talk about, right? We've got our carps, our buffalo, we've got some other species of sunfish that aren't really game fish, our gar, drum, bullheads, a lot of other species out there. The lake has a lot of fish. If you catch anything you don't know what it is, you can always send me a picture, or can help you figure it out. So with that, that's my contact info. If anybody has questions, comments, concerns, wants to, cuss me out, whatever, that's how you get a hold of me. I'm happy to ask or to answer any questions. And yeah, I think we're going to do a Q&A here later. I'll be here for that as well. So thanks for letting me drone on for a little bit. And I'll be here as well for the next few hours if anybody has any questions. Thanks.